The morning was calm, the kind of quiet small towns get before the day really starts. The sky was pale blue and a light mist hung over the streets. The old diner sat at the corner, its neon sign flickering softly. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air. The same faces showed up most mornings, the regulars who liked to talk about weather, fishing, and old times. In one corner, near the window, sat an old man who came there every morning without fail. He looked like he belonged there, the kind of man everyone knew by sight, even if they didn't know his name. His gray hair was trimmed short, his back slightly bent, but his eyes still had a spark. He wore a faded army jacket, the patches worn smooth over the years. Every morning he ordered the same thing: black coffee, 2 eggs, and toast. The waitress knew his order by heart. He didn't talk much, just gave a polite smile and a thank you each time she refilled his cup. He liked to sit quietly and watch people come and go, maybe share a few words with someone he recognized. He had served his country long ago, fought in a war that most young people only read about in history books. He never bragged about it. He never talked about what he'd seen. But those who knew him knew he had seen enough for several lifetimes. That morning, the diner was half full. A few truckers were finishing breakfast before hitting the road again. A mother and her little boy sat at a booth sharing pancakes. The waitress hummed softly as she wiped down the counter. Everything felt calm, ordinary. Then the door opened and the calm broke a little. A man walked in, younger, with an edge in his walk. He looked like trouble the moment he stepped inside. Loud, restless, like he had something to prove. His clothes were rough, his boots heavy, and his eyes carried a kind of arrogance that made people glance away. He looked around, then walked to the counter and sat a few stools away from the old veteran. The waitress gave a careful smile. "Morning. What can I get you?" He didn't smile back. "Coffee," he said shortly. "And make it quick." She nodded, keeping her tone polite. "Coming right up." The old man looked over at him once, then back down at his plate. He didn't like judging people, but he could feel tension from across the counter. Something about the man reminded him of others he'd seen, the kind who carried anger like a badge. The coffee came, but the man barely touched it. He seemed more interested in talking loud enough for others to hear. "Place like this," he muttered, shaking his head, "still serving old folks and nobodies. Guess that's what small towns do best." The waitress tried to ignore him. The truckers glanced at each other but said nothing. The old veteran kept eating, though his hands had slowed. Then the man turned toward him. "You come here every day?" he asked, his tone sharp. The old man looked up, surprised. "Most days," he said softly. "Coffee's good here," the man smirked. "You one of those old soldiers or something?" The diner went quiet. Everyone could hear the question. The veteran gave a slow nod. "Served a long time ago," he said. "Just trying to enjoy my breakfast, yeah?" the man said. "And I'm supposed to thank you for that or something?" The waitress froze halfway to the counter. The air felt tight now. One of the truckers shifted in his seat but didn't say a word. The old man sighed quietly, not looking for trouble. "No thanks needed," he said calmly. "Just trying to eat in peace," but the man wasn't done. He leaned closer, his voice rising. "You old guys think you're heroes or something, walking around like the world owes you." The veteran set down his fork. He turned his head slightly, meeting the younger man's eyes. "No one owes me anything," he said quietly. "I did what I had to do, that's all." Something about that calm tone made the man angrier. He wanted a reaction, but the old man gave him none. "Yeah, sure," the man said, laughing under his breath. "Bet you tell that story to anyone who'll listen." The waitress took a step closer. "Sir, please," she said softly. "Let's keep things friendly." The man looked at her, then back at the old man. "Friendly?" he said, mocking the word. "You want friendly?" He reached over suddenly, grabbed the old man's cup and spilled the coffee across the counter. The hot liquid spread fast, dripping onto the veteran's jacket and sleeve. A few people gasped. The old man winced but didn't move. He slowly reached for a napkin and started dabbing the spill. "That was unnecessary," he said quietly. The man leaned in closer. "What are you going to do about it?" The diner went completely silent now. The mother covered her son's ears. One of the truckers half rose from his seat, then sat back down again, unsure what to do. The waitress looked terrified. The old man looked up again. His eyes were tired but steady. "Young man," he said in a low, even voice, You don't know what real fights look like. Trust me, this isn't one. The man's jaw tightened. For a second, he hesitated. Then, without warning, he lifted his hand and slapped the old man across the face. The sound echoed through the diner. Every plate, every fork, every whisper stopped. The old veteran didn't fall or shout. He just sat there, his face turned slightly, one hand on the counter. The red mark began to show on his cheek. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. No one moved. The truckers looked away. The waitress looked like she might cry. The young mother held her son close. The man stood there, chest heaving, as if he'd proved something. "That's what I thought," he said roughly. "Nothing to say now, huh?" The old man's voice came quiet, almost a whisper. "You're angry at the wrong things, son," he said. The man laughed bitterly and threw a few crumpled bills on the counter. "Keep the change," he said, and turned toward the door. But just as he reached it, the sound of engines rolled through the air, low, heavy, and steady. The windows trembled slightly. Everyone turned their heads. The man paused, his hand on the door. The old man didn't move. He knew that sound. It was unmistakable. The waitress looked out the window and whispered, "Oh my." Outside, several motorcycles came into view, lined up side by side. Their engines rumbled like thunder as they slowed in front of the diner. The sunlight hit the chrome, flashing against the glass. On their jackets were patches, red and white, bold, unmistakable. Hell's Angels. The man at the door froze. The old veteran's eyes softened just a little, and for the first time that morning a small, knowing smile appeared on his face. The bikes came to a stop. One by one, the riders turned off their engines. The sound faded into silence, leaving only the ticking of cooling metal and the faint buzz of the diner's neon sign. The door swung open again. A tall figure stepped inside. Heavy boots, leather jacket, the same red and white patch across the back. He pulled off his sunglasses and looked around the room. His gaze landed on the old man sitting at the counter. "Dad?" he said. The diner went dead silent. The old man lifted his head, eyes meeting his son's. "Morning," he said softly. "Didn't expect to see you today." The younger man didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked from his father's face to the man still standing near the door. He noticed the red mark on the old man's cheek. His jaw tightened. "What happened?" he asked quietly, though his voice carried the kind of weight that made the whole room listen. The old veteran gave a small shake of his head. "Nothing important," he said, trying to ease the tension. But his son already knew better. He looked at the waitress, who seemed frozen, not sure if she should speak. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Then the biker turned to the man by the door. "You the one who touched him?" he asked, calm but cold. The man tried to smirk, but his voice cracked. "This your dad or something?" "Yeah," the biker said. "He's my dad." The man stepped back a little, realizing he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. The rest of the riders began stepping inside, one by one, their eyes sharp and silent. The diner filled with the heavy sound of boots on tile. No one spoke. The air grew thick again, but this time, it wasn't fear from one man's anger. It was power, respect, and something fierce behind it. The old man looked at his son and said softly, "Don't make a scene, all right?" His son gave a faint nod, but his eyes never left the man who had raised his hand. And in that silent moment, everyone in the diner knew things were about to change. The diner stayed quiet for a long moment after the biker walked in. The sound of his boots echoed as he took another step forward. His eyes moved from the counter to his father's face again, then back to the man standing near the door. Everyone inside could feel the change in the air. It was thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. The old veteran sat still on his stool. His hands were steady again, though his cheek still showed the mark. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from too many years of seeing the world act the way it does. The biker walked closer to him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder.
"You okay?"
he asked in a low voice. The old man nodded. "I'm fine, son," he said softly. "Just a small misunderstanding." The biker glanced at the spilled coffee, the napkins, the overturned salt shaker. "Looks like more than that." The old man gave a small sigh. "It's handled." The son didn't believe that for a second. His jaw tightened as he turned his eyes toward the man who had caused it. The thug shifted uneasily, trying to act calm, but everyone could see the nervous twitch in his hands. The waitress stood frozen behind the counter, her heart racing. The truckers who had been watching from their booth kept their eyes down, though one of them whispered, "That's his boy." The biker took a step closer to the man at the door. "You the one who thought you could raise your hand to an old man?" he asked quietly. The man's mouth opened, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. "He was talking smart," he said finally, his voice shaking just a little. "It wasn't like that." The biker didn't raise his voice. "Talking smart?" he repeated slowly. "That man fought for this country before you were even born. You call that talking smart?" The man looked away. "Look, I didn't know he was your dad." The biker stepped closer until they were almost face to face. "You shouldn't have to know that," he said. "You respect people because it's right, not because of who they're related to." Behind the biker, the rest of the riders had filled the diner quietly. They didn't say anything, but their presence filled every corner. The soft jingling of chains, the creak of leather, the faint smell of oil and road dust, it all added to the weight of the moment. The old man finally stood up. His son turned to steady him, but he waved him off gently. "Sit down," the veteran said softly. "I can handle this." The biker hesitated, then nodded slowly and stepped back. The old man looked at the younger one, the one who had hit him. "You're angry at something," he said. His voice wasn't harsh, just tired and calm. "I don't know what it is, but it isn't me. You think hurting people makes you strong, but it just means you're lost." The man blinked, unsure how to respond. He looked down at the floor. The silence in the diner was so deep you could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "I said I was sorry," the man muttered. The veteran nodded. "I heard you. But sorry isn't just words. It's how you live after." The biker watched quietly, letting his father handle it. He'd seen his dad calm storms before, not with fists, but with words that came from a place of truth. After a long pause, the man gave a small nod. "I messed up," he said quietly. "Didn't mean to take it that far." The veteran looked at him a moment longer, then said softly, "Then fix it. Be better." The words hung in the air for a few seconds. Then the man turned and left the diner. The bell above the door jingled as it closed behind him. The sound of his car starting outside faded into the distance until it was gone. The waitress finally let out the breath she'd been holding. "I thought it was about to get bad," she whispered. The biker turned to her and gave a small smile. "It's all right now," he said. "No one's getting hurt today." He turned back to his father. "You shouldn't have to deal with that," he said quietly. The old man chuckled softly. "I've seen worse," he said. "At least this time no one's shooting at me." His son didn't laugh. He just looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how fragile he seemed. How much time had passed since he'd last sat down for coffee with his old man. The waitress brought over a clean cup and poured fresh coffee. "On the house," she said gently. "You deserve it," the old man smiled. "Thank you." The other bikers started to relax, finding empty seats. One of them, a younger guy with a calm face, took off his gloves and nodded toward the veteran. "You raised a good man," he said. The veteran smiled faintly. "He raised himself most of the way. I just tried to teach him to do what's right." His son looked down at his cup. "You did that, Dad." For a few minutes, the diner went back to its normal rhythm. The truckers started eating again. The waitress wiped the counter. The mother with her little boy smiled softly, whispering something about good people. The jukebox played an old tune in the background, something from a time when the old man was young. Then the veteran said, "I didn't know you were back in town." His son nodded. "Got in last night. The guys and I were riding through, figured we'd stop by. I was going to surprise you later." The old man smiled. "Well, you sure surprised me now." The biker grinned. "Guess my timing's not too bad then." They both laughed quietly. The tension that had hung heavy earlier was fading now, replaced by warmth. After a while, the son leaned back. "You still come here every morning?" "Every single day," the veteran said. "Best coffee in the county. Keeps me young," his son chuckled. "Doesn't seem like it's slowing you down." "Oh, it slows me plenty," the old man said. "But I keep going." "That's the trick," the younger man nodded. "You always did." The waitress walked over again, her voice soft. "You know he's been coming here for years," she said to the biker. "Always sits in the same spot. Never complains. Everyone here respects him." "I can see why," the son said. "He's the strongest man I know." The old man shook his head with a smile. "No, son. Strong is what you do when you've got no other choice. The rest of the time you just live. The biker looked down, letting those words sink in. He knew his dad had been through a lot, but hearing him say it so simply made it hit harder. They sat there for a while longer, just talking, not about the incident, not about the war, not about the years they'd missed, just about simple things. The weather, the diner, the people. Small talk, but filled with quiet meaning. Eventually, one of the bikers checked his watch. "We should get going soon," he said. "We've got a ride ahead." The son nodded, then looked back at his father. "You sure you're all right?" The old man smiled gently. "I'm fine, son. You did what you came to do. You showed that some things still matter." The biker stood up and placed a few bills on the counter for the waitress. "Take care of him for me, all right?" She smiled. "Always do." As they started heading for the door, the old man called out softly, "Ride safe." His son turned back and grinned. "Always." Then the sound of engines roared to life again outside. The group rolled out slowly, their bikes glinting in the afternoon sun. The sound faded into the distance until all that was left was the soft hum of the jukebox again. Inside the diner, everything felt different now. The people who had stayed quiet earlier now smiled a little wider. The waitress refilled the veteran's cup again and said, "You've got quite a son." The old man smiled, watching the empty road outside the window. "Yeah," he said softly. "Guess I did something right." He took a slow sip of coffee, then sat back, closing his eyes for a moment. The warmth of the cup, the gentle chatter around him, the sunlight falling through the window, it all felt peaceful again. He didn't need to say anything more. He had lived long enough to know that sometimes the quiet after the storm is the best part of all. Outside, the last sound of motorcycles faded completely into the distance. The day went on. The world turned. But for that old man, sitting at his usual spot with his coffee, the world felt right again. Not because of what had happened, but because he knew that respect, once lost, could still be found. That night, the diner lights glowed softly against the dark street. The rain had started, light at first, then steady. Inside, the old man still sat in his favorite spot by the window. The waitress had just finished her shift and most of the customers were gone. Only the sound of rain tapping against the glass kept him company now. He sipped his coffee slowly. His hands were steady again, his thoughts calm, but deep down his mind kept returning to what had happened that morning. Not the slap, not the words, but the silence before it. The moment when no one stood up. That part hurt the most. He wasn't angry. He understood people. He knew fear better than most. But still, something about that silence stayed with him. He looked at his reflection in the window. The gray in his hair, the lines on his face, the eyes that had seen too much and still managed to look kind. He smiled faintly, though his heart felt heavy. The door opened softly. The bell above it gave a single ring. He looked up and saw his son standing there again, rain dripping from his jacket. "Figured you might still be here," his son said, walking over. The old man smiled. "Old habits," he said. "Didn't think you'd come back tonight." His son shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check on you." He sat down across from his father. The waitress on her way out smiled and said, "I'll get you both some fresh coffee before I go." "It's on me." The son thanked her quietly. When she left, the diner felt empty again. Just the two of them and the soft sound of rain. The old man studied his son for a moment. The leather jacket, the patches, the tired eyes. "You look like you've been carrying too much," he said softly. The younger man chuckled. "You always say that, because it's true." His son looked out the window. "It's not easy out there. People see the jacket and think they know who you are. They don't see the good we do. They just see what they want to." The old man nodded slowly. "That's how the world works sometimes. They see what's on the surface, not what's underneath." The son leaned back. "I tried to explain that to people once. Didn't go well." "Then stop explaining," his father said simply. "Live the kind of life that explains itself." His son looked at him quiet for a moment. "You always make it sound easy." "It's not easy," the old man said. "But it's simple. There's a difference." They sat in silence for a while. The coffee arrived steaming and rich. The son wrapped his hands around the cup. "You know, I didn't like seeing you like that today," he said finally. "It got to me." The old man smiled gently. "You did what any son would do." I almost lost it, his son admitted. If you hadn't stopped me, I don't know what would have happened. You listened, the old man said. That's what matters. His son took a deep breath. You always kept your calm even when you shouldn't have.
How do you do that?
The veteran looked down at his cup, his voice soft. Because I've seen what happens when people don't. I've seen what anger turns into when it's left to burn too long. The son nodded slowly. You mean the war? The old man didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted, remembering things he didn't talk about much. The war taught me a lot, he said finally. Mostly about people. You learn fast who you are when everything around you falls apart. The son watched him carefully. You don't talk about it much. No point, the old man said with a faint smile. Some things are better left in the past. But I'll tell you this. The only thing that kept me going back then wasn't anger or revenge. It was the hope that when I came home, people would treat each other better than we did over there. The son looked down. Guess that didn't happen. Sometimes it does, the old man said. Sometimes it doesn't, but we keep trying. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping harder on the window. The streetlight shimmered against the puddles. The son took a sip of his coffee. You know, after what happened today, some of the guys wanted to go find that man. They were angry. The old man raised an eyebrow. And what did you tell them? I told them to leave it alone, the son said quietly. You already handled it better than we ever could. The old man smiled. That's what makes you a leader. The son shook his head. I don't know about that. Leaders don't always give orders, the old man said. Sometimes they just show others how to do the right thing. The son thought about that for a moment. You always make things sound simple, he said again. His father smiled. Life's only complicated when we forget what matters. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The old man reached for the sugar jar and stirred his coffee, the small sound echoing in the quiet diner. Then his son asked, You ever get tired of being the calm one? Of always forgiving people who don't deserve it? The old man looked out the window. Sometimes. But forgiveness isn't for them, it's for me. If I don't let go, the hate stays, and I've carried enough weight in this life. His son nodded slowly. You're stronger than I'll ever be. The old man smiled. You're stronger than you think. A few headlights flashed past outside, the sound of tires on wet pavement fading quickly. The clock above the counter ticked softly. His son leaned forward, his voice low. You know, Dad, I didn't just come back for a visit. There's something else. The old man looked at him carefully. What is it? The son hesitated. Things are getting rough with the club. We've been trying to keep things clean. No trouble, no nonsense, but not everyone listens. Some of the guys want to go back to the old ways. They say we're getting soft. The old man took a slow breath. And what do you think? I think they're wrong, his son said. But sometimes it's hard being the one who stands up when everyone else wants to go the other way. The old man nodded slowly. That's where the real strength comes in. The son looked frustrated. It's just, people don't understand what loyalty really means anymore. Loyalty doesn't mean following blindly, the old man said. It means standing by what's right even when you stand alone. His son leaned back, thinking about it. You really believe that, huh? I've lived it, his father said softly. I watched good men lose their way because they thought loyalty meant silence. But silence can be just as dangerous as betrayal. The son nodded slowly, realizing the truth in those words. For a long time, they just sat there. Two men from two very different generations, yet more alike than either wanted to admit. The rain began to ease, turning into a soft drizzle. Finally, the old man stood up. Come on, he said. Let's head out. I need to get home before the cold gets in my bones. His son smiled, still as stubborn as ever. Runs in the family, the old man said, grinning. They paid for their coffee and walked out together. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cool. The street was quiet, the wet pavement shining under the streetlights. The old man walked slowly, his cane tapping lightly against the ground. His son walked beside him, steady and silent. When they reached the old man's truck, he stopped and turned to his son. You know, he said, what you did today, the way you handled yourself, made me proud. His son smiled faintly. I just did what you taught me. That's all I ever wanted, the old man said. For you to live what I taught you, the son nodded. I'll try to keep it that way. They stood there for a moment under the glow of the streetlight. The sound of the cooling engines from the bikes down the street faded slowly into the night. Go on, the old man said finally. Your friends are waiting." The son looked at him, his eyes soft. "You sure you're good?" "I'm fine, son," he said. "I've been through worse storms than this." The son smiled. "I know you have." He reached out and hugged his father, not the quick kind of hug men give to hide emotion, but the kind that says everything words can't. The old man held him tight for a moment, then patted his back. "Ride safe," he said quietly. "Always." The son stepped back, put on his helmet, and walked toward his bike. The old man stood by his truck watching as the engines started one by one, their low rumble filling the night again. As the bikes rode off down the dark, wet road, their red tail lights glowing like fireflies, the old man stood there a moment longer, smiling faintly. He climbed into his truck and started the engine. The radio came on, and an old song from decades ago. He let it play softly as he drove home through the quiet streets, thinking about how life changes, how people change, but respect, that never should. And that night, for the first time in a long while, he felt peace knowing that the lessons he'd lived by hadn't been forgotten. They had simply passed on to another generation in their own way, on 2 wheels instead of 2 boots. The next morning began quiet and gray. The old man woke early, as he always did long before the sun came up. His house was still, filled with that soft silence that comes after a night of rain. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, listening to the faint sound of birds outside. He stretched his back slowly and smiled to himself. His body might have been slowing down, but his mind was sharp as ever. He thought about the night before, the long talk with his son, the peace they'd found in their words. For the first time in a while, he felt like things were finally in balance again. He went to the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, the world was still waking up. The roads were wet and shining, and the air smelled fresh, like the kind of morning that promised something good. He didn't know it yet, but that day would turn into something much bigger than he expected. Around mid-morning, a car pulled up outside. The old man looked out and saw a few of the local riders, friends of his son, stepping out. They looked respectful but serious. The old man opened the door before they even knocked. "Morning, boys," he said with a gentle smile. "You're up early," one of them nodded. "Morning, sir. We just wanted to check on you. The guys are still talking about what happened at the diner." The old man chuckled softly. "I'm fine. It was just one of those things. Not worth losing sleep over." But the young man standing closest shook his head. "It wasn't right, sir. People around town are upset. They think someone like you should have been shown respect." The old man looked at them carefully. "Respect isn't something you demand," he said. "It's something you earn, and sometimes something you keep by staying calm." The riders nodded quietly. They respected him, not just because he was the father of their leader, but because he carried himself with quiet dignity. One of them hesitated. "Your son's been real quiet today," he said. "We think something's on his mind." The old man smiled faintly. "That boy's always got something on his mind. He's his father's son." They all laughed softly. Before they left, the old man said, "Tell him I said to come by later. I've got something for him." They agreed, thanked him, and rode off. The low rumble of their engines faded down the street, leaving behind the soft stillness again. The old man went back inside and pulled out a small wooden box from the top shelf of his closet. Inside were a few medals, some photographs, and a folded letter. He hadn't opened it in years. He sat down and looked at it, the creases, the faded ink. It was a letter he'd written to his son a long time ago, back when his son was just a boy. He had never given it to him back then. Life had moved too fast. But now it felt like the right time. He smiled at the handwriting, a little uneven from all those years ago. He folded it neatly again and put it back in the box. That afternoon he went back to the diner. It had become a kind of habit. The same table, the same coffee, the same kind waitress who always brought it just the way he liked it. The other regulars nodded respectfully when he came in. They all knew what had happened a couple of days earlier. Some gave him quiet smiles, others just a nod, the kind that says more than words ever could. The waitress poured his coffee and said softly, "You doing all right today?" He smiled. "Better than I deserve." She smiled too. "People are still talking about you, you know. That thing that happened. They say you handled it better than anyone could have," he chuckled. "I'm just too old to argue with fools." Just then the door opened and his son walked in. This time he wasn't alone. A few of his friends came in with him, all wearing their jackets but their faces calm and respectful. The whole diner seemed to pause for a second. The old man waved them over. "Come on, sit down. Coffee's good today." They joined him, filling the booth around him. There was a strange energy in the room, quiet but strong. The son looked at his father with that familiar half-smile. "You always beat me here," he said. "Habit," his father replied. "Old soldiers don't sleep much." The waitress brought more coffee, and for a few minutes, the sound of cups clinking and soft talk filled the air again. Then his son leaned in and said quietly, "Dad, I've been thinking, what you said last night, about living a life that explains itself, it stuck with me." The old man smiled. "Good, that means you're listening." His son continued, "Some of the guys in the club, they don't see it that way. They think respect comes from fear. I'm trying to show them it doesn't." The old man nodded slowly. "You can't teach everyone. Some people learn the hard way." "Yeah," his son said, but I don't want things to get out of hand. You know how quick things can turn." The old man leaned back. "Then lead by example. Don't try to change them all at once. Just show them who you are." His son looked thoughtful. "I'll try." The conversation drifted to other things. Old stories, shared memories, laughter that came easier than it had in years. For a little while, it felt like the world outside didn't exist, but deep down, both men knew that peace like this didn't last forever. The world had a way of testing you just when you thought things had settled. Later that afternoon, the son got a call. He stepped outside to take it. When he came back in, his face looked tense. The old man noticed right away. "What is it?" he asked quietly. His son hesitated. "Some guys from the other side of town. They've been causing trouble again. One of the new kids ran into them last night. It didn't end well." The old man sighed. "And now they want payback?" The son nodded. "That's what I'm trying to stop. But some of the younger ones, they're fired up. They think this is about pride." The old man looked at him firmly. "You know better. Pride's just a mask for fear." "I know," the son said. "But they don't." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I just want to keep things steady, Dad. Keep everyone safe." The old man looked at him with quiet pride. "Then do what's right, not what's easy." The son took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah, you're right." He stood up, his jacket catching the light as he moved. "I've got to take care of this before it spreads." The old man gave a slow nod. "Be careful. You've got people counting on you." "I will," his son said. "I'll stop by later." The old man watched him go, the sound of the diner door closing softly behind him. As the day went on, the old man sat quietly, lost in thought. He knew what his son was walking into, not a fight, but a test. A test of who he was and what kind of man he wanted to be. The waitress came by again and said softly, "You all right?" He smiled. "I'm always all right. Just thinking." She nodded, then left him to his thoughts. The rain started again outside, a soft drizzle that blurred the streetlights. The old man finished his coffee and looked out the window, his reflection mixing with the faint glow of the diner lights. He whispered to himself, "He'll do fine. He's got his mother's heart and his father's stubbornness. That's a good mix." Later that evening, the sound of engines echoed faintly in the distance. The old man smiled, knowing his son was out there doing what he needed to do, not to prove a point, but to make things right. When he finally got home that night, he took out the wooden box again and placed the folded letter on the table. He thought about giving it to his son soon. It was time. He turned off the lights and sat by the window for a while, the night stretching quiet and calm around him. He didn't know exactly what the next day would bring, but he felt a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. Sometimes, life has a way of circling back, of showing you that everything you've taught, every quiet act of patience, every moment of restraint, it all adds up. And sometimes when the world tests you, it's those lessons that keep you standing tall. As he finally went to bed, he whispered a simple prayer under his breath, not for himself, but for his son. That he'd stay safe, that he'd keep his heart clear, and that, when the time came, he'd know what it truly meant to be a man. Outside, the rain faded and the first hint of dawn began to stretch across the horizon. The old man smiled in his sleep, knowing that no matter what happened next, his son had learned what mattered most, not revenge, not pride, but honor. And sometimes, That's all it takes to set things right. The next morning came with a calm sky, the kind of soft golden light that made everything look peaceful. The old man woke early again, though he hadn't slept much. He sat in his kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air, waiting for some sign from his son. He had learned long ago that waiting was part of life. In war, he had waited for news from home. In peace, he had waited for time to heal wounds no one could see. Now, as a father, he waited for the sound of a motorcycle in the distance, a sound that always told him his boy was safe. But the morning stayed quiet. He tried not to worry. His son knew how to handle himself. Still, every minute that passed felt heavier. He looked out the window at the sunlight falling across the street and thought about all the times his son had tested the world and come back stronger. He had faith he would again. Around mid-morning, there was finally a knock at the door. When he opened it, he saw two riders standing outside. Their jackets were soaked with dew and their faces looked tired. But they smiled when they saw him. "He's all right, sir," one of them said quickly. "Everything's fine now." The old man felt the tension ease from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said softly. "Come in, have some coffee." They stepped inside and he poured them both a cup. The younger one spoke first. "Your son handled things the right way, sir. You'd be proud. He didn't let it turn ugly." The old man nodded slowly. "He's learning." The other man smiled. "Yeah, he talked to everyone, kept things calm. No one got hurt. Even the other guys, they backed down after he spoke to them." The old man looked down at his cup and smiled faintly. "That's what leadership looks like." They talked for a while longer before the riders left. The old man stood by the window and watched as their bikes disappeared down the road. For the first time in days, he felt his chest loosen. The quiet kind of peace that comes when you know your child has done something good. A few hours later, his son arrived. The sound of his motorcycle rumbling down the street was enough to make the old man smile. He opened the door before his son even knocked. "You look tired," the old man said. His son laughed softly. "It's been a long night." "Come in," the old man said. Coffee's still warm. They sat at the kitchen table, the same place where countless conversations had started over the years. The old man poured coffee for both of them, and for a moment they just sat quietly. Finally, the son said, "It's done, Dad. No fights, no trouble. I made sure of it. I heard," the old man said. "The boys stopped by earlier. They told me what you did." The son smiled faintly. "I didn't do much. I just told them what you've been telling me my whole life. That respect isn't about how loud you are. It's about how you treat people even when they don't deserve it." The old man nodded, his eyes soft. "That's a lesson most folks never learn." "You did good, son." His son looked down at his hands. There was a moment, though. It could have gone bad fast. They were angry and so were some of ours. But I kept thinking about you sitting in that diner. How calm you were even after that man tried to humiliate you. You didn't let hate win. I tried to do the same. The old man reached across the table and placed his hand over his son's. "You did better than I ever could have. I only stayed calm because I didn't have anything to prove. But you had every reason to lose your temper and you didn't. That takes more strength than any punch." His son smiled, a little embarrassed. "Guess I had a good teacher." They both laughed quietly. The sound filled the small kitchen, warm and easy. After a moment, the old man stood and walked to his bedroom. When he returned, he carried the small wooden box, the one that had sat on his shelf for decades. He placed it on the table and slid it toward his son. "What's this?" his son asked. The old man sat down. "Something I should have given you a long time ago." His son opened the box carefully. Inside were a few medals, a couple of old photographs, and a folded letter. He looked up. "You kept all this?" The old man smiled. "Every piece of it. The medals don't mean much to me now, but that letter, that's for you." The son unfolded it gently. The paper was yellowed with age, the handwriting a little faded. As he read, his eyes softened. It was a letter from a father to his young son, written years ago before the boy had grown into a man, before life had tested either of them. The letter spoke about courage, kindness, and the meaning of strength. It said that real bravery wasn't found on battlefields or in fights. It was found in how a man carried himself when no one was watching. When the son finished reading, he looked up, his voice quiet. You wrote this when I was a kid? The old man nodded. I never knew when the right time was to give it to you, but I think you earned it now. The son folded the letter carefully, his throat tight. I don't know what to say. The old man smiled. You don't need to say anything. Just live by it. They sat there for a while, letting the silence say what words couldn't. Outside, the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long golden shadows through the window. The air smelled like rain again, soft and clean. After a few minutes, the son spoke. You know, the guys from the club want to do something nice for you. They said you reminded them what respect really means. The old man chuckled. They don't need to do anything for me, just live decent lives. That's thanks enough. The son nodded. They see you as something more than my father now. They see you as someone worth listening to. The old man looked amused. Now that's a dangerous thing. They both laughed again, the tension between them replaced by quiet warmth. As the evening settled, the son stood to leave. I've got to head back. The guys are meeting tonight, and I need to make sure things stay peaceful. The old man stood too. I know you will. The son hesitated for a moment. You want me to stop by tomorrow? Maybe grab breakfast at the diner? The old man smiled. You bring the stories and I'll bring the coffee. They shared a long hug, firm and heartfelt, the kind that holds years of unspoken understanding. When the son rode off, the sound of his motorcycle echoed down the quiet street, fading slowly into the night. The old man watched until the last flicker of the tail light disappeared. Then he went inside, sat down, and looked at the letter still lying on the table. He smiled to himself. Life, he thought, has a funny way of coming full circle. That evening, the diner lights glowed again. The old man decided to take a short walk there just for the company. When he arrived, a few familiar faces greeted him warmly. People had heard the story, not the violent version, but the lesson behind it. An older gentleman at the counter raised his coffee cup. Heard your son set things straight the right way. The old man smiled modestly. He did what any decent man would do. Another voice from across the room said, The world could use more men like that. The old man nodded softly. The world already has them. They just need a reason to show up. The diner fell quiet for a moment, not out of awkwardness but out of respect. Then the conversation started again, lighter now, filled with laughter and the clinking of cups. As the old man sat by the window watching the evening settle in, he felt something deep in his chest, and not pride exactly, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've done your part, that the lessons you lived by won't be forgotten. He looked out at the road and smiled when he saw a group of motorcycles roll past slowly, their headlights glowing like a trail of stars. One of the riders raised a hand in salute as they passed the diner. The old man raised his coffee cup in return. For a long moment, he just sat there, a quiet man in a small-town diner, surrounded by ordinary people, carrying a lifetime of stories in his eyes. And as the night deepened, he thought about how life had tested him again and again, through war, through loss, through moments of anger and forgiveness. But in the end, it wasn't the battles that defined him. It was the way he chose to respond to them. When he finally stood to leave, he looked around the diner one last time, smiled at the waitress, and said softly, You all take care now. Outside, the air was cool and still. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like quiet reminders of all the nights he'd lived through. He took a deep breath, tucked his hands in his jacket pockets, and started walking home, the sound of his steps steady and calm. As he turned the corner, he could almost hear his son's laughter in the distance, mixed with the faint hum of motorcycle engines heading home. And that sound, that soft fading rumble, was enough to tell him that everything was all right. Because in the end, it wasn't about payback or pride. It was about honor, family, and the quiet strength that never needed to shout to be heard.